In the echoing silence of the Special Forces Armory, where steel racks gleamed with rifles and the smell of gun oil mixed with desert dust, the unthinkable happened. Master Sergeant Cole Hunter, a Medal of Honor sniper whose name had become legend in firefights across Iraq and Afghanistan, leaned back against a bench, folded his arms, and with a smirk that carried decades of battlefield victories, said the words that froze every soldier in the room. "I bet my Medal of Honor you can't hit 800 meters?" Nobody wagered a Medal of Honor, not unless they were certain it was untouchable, and yet Cole's challenge was aimed not at another decorated veteran, but at Captain Sarah Mitchell, a newcomer recently attached to their unit, a woman whose reputation was whispered in fragments, an expert in ballistics, quiet under pressure, but untested in the eyes of men who lived by the rifle. The moment hung heavy, boots scuffed against the floor, breaths held, disbelief crackling in the air like static, because the 3,800-meter shot was more myth than mark, the kind of distance that mocked even the finest snipers with shifting winds, curving trajectories, and the cruel mathematics of physics itself. Cole's grin widened, his hand brushing the metal on his chest as if daring her to try, but Sarah's response was not a laugh or a protest. She simply met his eyes, her expression, unreadable and whispered with steady certainty, "Set it up." The men followed them out to the blistering desert range, their chatter subdued, curiosity and doubt mingling as Sarah selected her weapon with surgical care, ignoring the racks of familiar rifles and choosing instead an experimental long barrel. Rifle few dared to touch, pairing it with a scope. She adjusted with hands that trembled not from nerves but from precision. Cole stood tall, arms crossed, his metal glinting in the sun, his legend radiating like armor, and as Sarah lay prone, aligning her sight on the distant white silhouette shimmering nearly invisible on the horizon, the soldiers around her whispered. Bets, some mocking, some uneasy, all caught between hope and disbelief. She inhaled, exhaled, adjusted for wind, for humidity, for the subtle tremor of the earth itself, her mind a living equation, until at last her finger tightened on the trigger and the crack split the desert stillness. Seconds dragged into eternity, as the bullet cut through heat and distance, until faint and almost ghostly, a metallic ping carried back across the barren ground. The silhouette rocked. She had hit it. The crowd erupted in shouts of disbelief, laughter, curses, but Sarah only rose, brushed the dust from her uniform, and walked past Cole without a flicker of triumph, her words barely more than a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut through the noise. "You can keep your medal." And in that moment, a new legend was born. One that would not stay contained within the walls of that armory, but would ripple outward, whispered across bases, passed between soldiers like fire, catching dry grass, the impossible shot that defied pride, physics, and expectation alike. By dawn the next day, the armory was no longer just an armory. It was the birthplace of a story that spread through the unit like wildfire, carried on lips in the mess hall, in the barracks, and across the radio chatter of soldiers who couldn't stop repeating what they had seen. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the newcomer, had done what even the great Cole Hunter himself might not have risked in front of a crowd. The tale grew with every telling. Some swore she hadn't even blinked. Others claimed she whispered numbers like a machine before pulling the trigger. And though the details twisted in the retelling, one truth remained. She had struck a target, at 3,800 meters on her first attempt. For some it was thrilling. For others, unsettling. Because in the culture of special forces, legends were currency, and Cole Hunter's reputation had always been gold. Now that gold was tarnished, not destroyed, but undeniably dented, and though Cole's face betrayed little, inside his pride smoldered like a fuse waiting to ignite. Men who once spoke his name with awe now measured him against her, and the whispers stung sharper than any bullet wound. Unable to let the story rest, Cole sought Sarah out, his voice low, his tone carrying challenge masked as camaraderie, proposing not a single lucky shot, but a trial. 10 targets, progressive ranges, time measured, accuracy counted, a true test of skill where luck had no refuge. To the men listening nearby, the suggestion was more than competition. It was redemption, the chance for Cole to reclaim his throne or for Sarah to seize it entirely. Sarah didn't hesitate. Her answer was not boastful, not mocking, just calm, the kind of calm that rattled the bravest of men. Name the range and I'll be there. The soldiers exchanged looks. Betts whispered again, the tension shifting from awe to anticipation, because what had begun as an impulsive wager in an armory was now becoming something far greater, a duel of precision that would define not just two snipers, but the very idea of what was possible when pride and skill collided under the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. The day of the trial arrived under a burning sun, the shooting range lined with targets that stretched farther than most soldiers had ever dared to aim, each one placed deliberately to expose weakness, moving silhouettes at 2,000 meters, shifting, wind tunnels at 3,000, and finally, a distant steel plate gleaming at 3,800, the mark of the impossible. The crowd was larger this time. Not just the unit, but visiting officers, instructors, and even a handful of British SAS men who had flown in for joint training and now stood curious at the rumor that a newcomer had shaken the legend of Cole Hunter. The rules were simple. 10 targets, each progressively harder, fastest time with most hits would win. Cole approached with his usual swagger, his custom rifle polished, his presence commanding, while Sarah knelt calmly beside her weapon, eyes narrowed not in arrogance but in calculation, the kind of focus that made even veterans uneasy. When the whistle blew, Cole was a storm, rifle snapping, shots echoing, dust kicking from impacts, his speed unmatched, his confidence returning as each target fell under his precision. Soldiers cheered as his score climbed, and by the time he hit the 3,000-meter target, many were already certain the outcome was sealed. But then Sarah began. She didn't rush. She moved like a clock, every adjustment deliberate, every breath measured, and though her pace was slower, each shot rang true, each target dropped with uncanny accuracy until she reached the 3,800 mark and the crowd fell silent once more. Cole had taken 3 attempts to land his round, cursing the wind and muttering calculations, but Sarah fired only once, her bullet striking dead center with surgical perfection, and the silence that followed was thicker than applause. Cole stared. At her, his pride wounded deeper than any battlefield scar. And though he forced a grin for the crowd, inside he knew this was no accident. Sarah Mitchell wasn't a fluke. She was a sniper whose calm precision might surpass his own, and that truth gnawed at him like a shadow he could not escape. But the rivalry that began as a challenge in an armory did not end at the range, because weeks later, their unit was deployed on a joint mission deep in hostile territory where intelligence had reported a fortified compound holding a high-value target, one that could shift the balance of the entire conflict. It was a mission that demanded stealth, patience, and above all, perfect marksmanship. Cole and Sarah were paired together, much to his frustration and the silent amusement of their team, and as they crawled into position on a jagged ridge overlooking the valley, the truth of their skills was finally put to the test not in competition but in survival. The enemy compound bristled with sentries, patrols, and snipers hidden in towers, the kind of fortress designed to repel even the best. Hours passed as they waited, watching, calculating, sweat dripping beneath their ghillie suits, until finally the target appeared, surrounded, shielded, and moving fast. Cole lined up his shot, the Medal of Honor weight heavy on his chest. But the angle was bad, the wind unpredictable, and for the first time his finger hesitated on the trigger. Beside him, Sarah whispered calm adjustments. Wind speed, target pace, angle correction. And in that moment, Cole realized she wasn't just competing. She was teaching him, steadying him, proving that her gift was not only in hitting the impossible, but in seeing the shot no one else could. He fired, guided by her corrections, and the bullet found its mark, dropping the target in silence before the valley erupted in chaos. Together, they exfiltrated under fire, moving as one, covering each other with flawless precision until the helicopters lifted them into the night sky. Back at base, when the mission was debriefed, Cole finally broke his silence, standing before the men and women who had once cheered only for him, and said with a voice that carried weight beyond medals, "Captain Mitchell isn't just the best shot I've ever seen. She's the reason we're all here tonight." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Sarah only lowered her head, her calm smile unchanged, because legends are not written by medals or boasts, but by the quiet truth of a single impossible shot, and now hers would live forever, whispered in the halls of both U.S. Special Forces and the British SAS as the day a woman rewrote the limits of what snipers could achieve.